episode of my podcast, a little bit of this and a little bit of that, I need to first apologize and say, where have I been? And I have been everywhere. It feels like, when I started this journey, I told you I was very, very nervous to do this. And I still am. Let's not pretend. And I looked at, sharing what it feels like to open up and start in a new space in my journey. And while doing this new space, it meant opening my heart to opportunities. Well, it's really funny. Like when you open your heart to opportunities and things, all of a sudden opportunities come. And where I thought, I'm no longer driving a kid around and I'm no longer doing this, that means life is going to slow down a little bit. It's kind of gone the opposite. I've been hanging out with my husband. All of a sudden there was time. Checking in on my parents, picked up a part-time job. And so all of a sudden my time got away from me. And literally I am recording an episode that I wrote 3 weeks ago. And so I am so sorry for that. But it's important that I do this and I bring it to you because we've got some exciting things happening and I can't wait to tell you about them. So one of the things that is interesting about this particular podcast is that when I titled it a little bit of this and a little bit of that, it was really because I couldn't find a focus. And I have so many thoughts in my head, right? So right now, this is being published on my brand's pages. And I realized I think it's a perfect place for it because I am a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And if you know me, I'm a former teacher. So I've got some education things rolling around in my head. But I have a creative mind and I like to put things together and I like to decorate and I like to design and became an event planner as a result of that. So I've got event things on my page. Don't be shocked. And I just have the things that I'm passionate about show up on my brand pages, Elizabeth Daniette Brands. So you'll see that on my Instagram page, on my Facebook page, on my Substack. That's the pod page, right? And the YouTube page as well. So don't get confused. You will find something that you like and something that fits with you and something that works with you because my story is not a unique story, right? It's a story that a lot of women are experiencing a lot of the time. And a lot of women in this age, and we're going to talk about this in our next episode, are all over the place because our brains are all over the place, right? And I just wanted to give that little preview background to where I've been. I will do better. In fact, you guys are going to get 2 episodes this week. I'm very excited about that. And we are going to talk about it. So let's get into today's podcast. And I have entitled it, Do We Owe Ourselves an Apology? And by way of background, I don't know if you guys have paid attention. I am a woman of a certain age, which means that like many Gen Xers and older millennials, we've woken up to discover this thing called perimenopause. It's definitely going to be the topic of our next episode. But about 3 weeks ago, the FDA finally removed its black box warning. The warning that they put on HRT, hormone replacement therapy products for women. And let me tell you, it's about time because a lot of women I know, have had to go undercover, have had to have doctors prescribe things against their better wishes and have gone ignored as we go through a different transition in our life. I call it puberty in reverse. It's the best way for me to describe it to people. And my really good friend, Keisha, hit me up one day and said, Dan, I want you to host my virtual speaking tour on your podcast. And I got to be honest, I told Keisha, what are you talking about? I have like 5 followers. Actually, it's a little bit more than 5 now. By the way, thank you very much. Keep talking, keep spreading. I said, are you sure? I don't even feel like I'm big enough. I don't even feel like I have an impact here. And she said, it doesn't really matter. None of it matters because the story needs to still be told. So I said, okay. And so she is on a We Owe Women an Apology tour And I'm going to give you more details at the end of this episode, but that was what kind of triggered the thought I had when I sat down to write this particular episode. When I got up the morning that I wrote this episode, I thought to myself in a very Carrie Bradshaw narrated moment, do we owe ourselves an apology? And quite honestly, like I said, we do. So here's the thing. Women like myself were raised indirectly or directly with the superwoman complex. I know for me specifically, I had the superwoman complex. In it, it's one of those things where you show you can do everything, but you never show the cracks. You never show the tears, and you swallow your tears. You never see them. You never let them see you sweat, right? You never let whoever they is actually get the inside track and know that they got to you, right? Like, you never let that happen. And what we look at is, it feels like we were programmed, maybe even brainwashed to think that this was appropriate. And I'll tell you, my inspiration came from my life. So look, I'm on the younger end of Gen X, right? I'm the first generation of integration, raised by literal Jim Crow boomers who were raised by the silent generation and who were raised during the Great Migration. And that lineage shapes everything. So because of who I come from and because of the outside factors that they were raised in, that came down to me. Listen, I come from a line of people who are amazing. And so and powerful women, right? And so when you grow up with that lineage, you feel like you got to sit up straighter and you can't embarrass the legacy and the family line, not really paying attention to what the cost is, because that legacy told us to always do better than expected, right? Don't embarrass the family. You have to work hard. Don't make waves, because what? Somebody's going to notice you. You keep your business private. We clearly didn't grow up in social media. You respect your elders. You choose the right man, and right is layered. And you get married, you have kids, and you live happily ever after. We saw our mothers, my mother, do that. My mom has been married for 52 years. We watched my grandmothers do it, and our aunts do the impossible with next to nothing, right? Next to nothing. And so I was raised thinking that I could do it too. And I did. I sacrificed a lot. And I love what I did. But there was a cost that I didn't realize until I got to a certain age that I realized they experienced as well. I mean, and they did it. Amazing things, because they had a family to support. They had things to do. And I did things because I had a family to support. A husband and children, right? And a life. And I was beholden to legacy, to the expectations that others had put on me. And when you're raised like we're raised, in the time that we're raised, I'm being very specific about the time that we were raised, you living up to the legacy and the lineage and not embarrassing it was very important. Respecting your elders were very important. So if your elders, meaning your parents, your family members, expected a certain thing from you, you did it because, and you didn't fight back. You just might have hidden your real feelings. But the reality was, in pushing things down, the real you gets pushed down too. in pushing your stresses down, in not pushing back, in not recognizing at the time that the life you were living was absolutely different than the life your parents lived. The access you had was different, and the children you were raising are living a life that's completely different than your life, right? So we had to make some adjustments. And there is a price, a heavy price to being a superwoman. And for me, and for others like me, that price actually shows up in our bodies. It shows up in early heart disease, autoimmune disorders. That was mine, is mine. Anxiety, depression, not in the ways that you see it. It's hidden depression, right? We're high functioning depressed people. Loneliness, dementia, cognitive decline, chronic stress disorders. All of those fun things are killing us softly at the cost of being a superwoman. Meanwhile, we're quietly living our own struggles, living in the comparison world. Like I said, idolizing the women in front of us, saying, oh, I just need to, if I work a little harder, I can pull this off. If I get up earlier, I can do the things that my mom did. And not understanding that that generation was built on survival and not emotional wellness. And there's a difference. They didn't have the privilege of understanding what emotional wellness would do to their health. Like I said, for me personally, I feel like I was sold built goods. And there was a time that I got very angry about that, trying to live up to everybody else's expectations. I lost myself, my self-esteem. And I think for a lot of my generation, our self-esteems were tied to perfection and praise, right? So if you got good grades or if you did something great, you get all this praise. And so let me pause for a minute. I'm the oldest. I'm the oldest of my family, and I'm an oldest girl. Take that for what it will, and maybe I'll circle back and talk about it a little bit more. But you have to understand what that puts on, the pressure that it puts on unintentionally, the things we wear unintentionally as a result. So my esteem growing up was built on praise and perfection and success. And there was no space, and I think that was unintentional. I don't even think that that was my parents' intent, to actually have that moment where if I failed, it was a disappointment. If I didn't meet the mark, it was a disappointment. And therefore, I didn't want to disappoint anybody, and that became an issue. So I became the person who lived up to everybody else's expectations of who I am and to make everybody else comfortable. And that's a problem. You should not have to feel like you are making everybody else comfortable at the cost of your own success. And so the quickest way to break me at the time was criticism. I couldn't take criticism, and quite honestly, I have a little hard time with it now. I'll just be honest. Hence the reason I didn't even necessarily want to do this, because I was afraid of putting myself out there. Because the moment you put yourself out there, that means you open yourself up to criticism. And I'm not built like the younger generation who doesn't care. Why? Because we were built with, I am a recovering people pleaser. So that makes it a little bit harder. And people who didn't like the work that I did, or who were jealous at the work that I did and what I was able to accomplish in my job, realized quickly that they could manipulate me by criticizing me. You could get me to work harder, longer, by guilting me and by criticizing me and making me feel like I wasn't reaching the mark, this self-induced crazy mark. But yeah, that's what was in my mind meant that I was a failure. Well, that doesn't work because unless you have something intrinsic in you to keep pushing you, unless you see value in yourself, you're going to fall apart and fail. And quite honestly, and not even fail, you're going to get burnt out. And you're going to be bitter. And you're going to have trust issues. And I have all of those. And for me, it was tough because I got angry. And I got angry. And I got angry at everything and everybody. And I was hurt. And I felt like there was no place to go. And I felt abandoned. So that entered a stage in my life that I call the Great Unlearning. And let me be very clear. My life fell apart. All the way apart. Burnt to the ground. Lost friends. Lost relationships. I got very sick, which magnified my depression, my anxiety, and real talk, I kind of just pulled back from the world. So during that phase, it became, like I said, the Great Unlearning, or my own self-apology tour. And what I realized was that if I kept breaking myself to make everybody else feel comfortable, I was never going to heal, and I needed to heal. And when depression smothered me to the point where I couldn't breathe, and I was unemployed, and I couldn't afford therapy, I decided I had to do something because I needed my kids. The only thing that was holding me above ground was my kids. And I didn't want my kids to repeat my story. I did not want them to repeat what I had gone through and what I experienced. And I get it. We can't shield our kids from life, but I can hope they don't make the same mistakes. Maybe they'll make their own, right? So I couldn't afford therapy, but I figured I had to do something, right? Because my kids deserved a healthy mother. That was important. So in the middle of figuring something out, I realized I didn't like myself. There was a voice in my head that would talk about me and would pick at all the decisions I made, second guess them, the words I'd said, the people I'd talked to. You should have said this better. This is why they don't like you. And if you know anything about depression, it magnifies that voice. And I realized I didn't like myself. I didn't even love myself. And you know, when you tell somebody that they have low self-esteem, you just think, oh, because you know, you don't see your own value. No. I feel like it's deeper than that. You literally don't like yourself. And I was talking to myself in a way that was tougher and meaner. And if anybody else would talk about one of my friends in the way that I was talking to myself, I'd have cussed them out. I would have told my friend, don't ever speak to that person again. And that's how I was talking to myself and had been talking to myself for decades. Inside of me was a person that second guessed every single thing. And I realized that I had to retrain the voice in my head. So to do that, I started writing letters to myself, literally a dear diary. And I feel like that was ridiculous to start, but I had some rules for myself. I could not speak to myself in negative language. Just couldn't do it. Even if it was a bad day, I could talk about it being a bad day, but I had to reframe it. That was one. And I had to find one good thing that happened that day. And it could be, I made it through the day. It obviously felt silly. I'm not even gonna lie to you. I felt like a clown writing to myself, Dear Daniette. But I did. And every day, and they started out 2-3 sentences, maybe a paragraph or two. And then one day, I can't even tell you, it was probably 2-3 weeks in, it was like something cracked open. And everything came out. I was writing and I was crying, and it was pages and pages and pages. And again, still followed my rules. And I forgave myself for not being perfect. And that's a big piece. Forgive myself for not living up to the expectations of somebody else. So that was the beginning of my healing, real healing, and the beginning of accepting truths about myself. See, when you have to forgive yourself, you have to acknowledge the things that you did poorly and the choices that you made that were not good choices. The difference is you also have to look at the reasons why you made those choices. And were those choices just choices you made because you were a participant and not a person that was in charge? Doing it just because somebody else told you that's what you were supposed to do? Or were you playing offense? Were you just playing defense? Were you just standing on the court? Or were you moving the ball forward? And a lot of times I was really more being on defense or just standing and getting it done because I was talented enough to do that, versus being on the offense and driving my train forward. There was a time when I was very young that I was driving my own train forward. But then I gave the keys away because I thought I was supposed to. And that's an interesting place and journey to be, when you give away your power and you thought that that's what you're supposed to do. And that's the trick. The trick in growing up is balancing what you think you're supposed to do based on the models you see versus what it actually means. Because when you're looking at a model, you're just looking at the outside and you're not looking at, you don't have access to what's actually going on behind the doors. But like I said, that was the beginning of my healing. And one of the things I did, as I said, I forgave myself and I decided to let me be human. Like, who said I had to be superhuman? Literally nobody. I'm mad because it was the expectation on me, but it was an expectation. It was an expectation that I had allowed to be put on me, right? Sometimes you have to own what you allow to happen to you. That's what accountability is owning it. And then learning how to not do that again, right? That's the different piece, is what exactly are we looking at and why aren't we owning that piece? So I told myself I had allowed myself to be human. I would forgive other people because they're human. And I had to learn how to give myself grace. So in the Great Unlearning, it was forgiving myself, acknowledging things, allowing myself to be human, and allowing myself to give grace. Grace is important. Then I had to learn how to love myself, like myself, to look at myself in the mirror and say, you are pretty. Or it's okay if you don't feel like you have it today. That's okay, right? This has been a journey. So one of the things I would do when I was struggling really hard, I wrote messages to myself on the mirror in my bathroom. I love you, you've got it, all the things that you've seen on TV shows, movies, whatever. I did it. And it's funny, they tell you to do it, you're watching them do it, and you go, oh, it actually kind of works. One day, I came back to my bathroom, and my goddaughter and my daughter had written messages on that mirror. They were probably 7 or 8 or 8 or 9. And they wrote these messages, and I just looked at this bathroom mirror and cried and never erased them. They were like, you got this. You're amazing in their little 3rd and 4th grade ways of writing things down. They were beautiful. It was funny, like 2-3 years ago, that bathroom got redone. And the people who were doing it, they were like, oh, what do you want to do with this mirror? And I was like, I'm keeping it. And so that mirror with their messages that they wrote 10 or 12 years ago, you know, they're in college and getting ready to graduate high school now, sits in my closet as a reminder. I'm going to keep it forever. For as long as they let me keep it, I'm going to keep that mirror, because the messages that are on it was these little people loved me and believed in me when I didn't love and believe myself. And I'm never going to forget that, because the impact of a small gesture, they had no idea the impact was very important. You know, right now I'm trying not to cry and to think about it, but they felt like auntie and mom needed to hear it, or they just wanted to join the show that I had put down myself. That's the other thing when you realize you owe yourself an apology, is that there are people that you are impacting that you don't even realize you're impacting, that you bring good to the world in your own special way, through people that you're not paying attention to. And I'll just add this, learning to lean into those people, because that's where your appreciation is, and stop looking at the people that you feel like should appreciate you, the people that you are performing for. Those aren't your people anymore. And they might come back around, right? They don't know the impact that they have on you. You place that on them. So I own my spot, but I realized there were people over here that needed me, loved me, and it helped shift my focus into helping them. So now as I look at all this, the Great Unlearning and suffering from superwoman complex, why does this all matter? And do we really owe ourselves an apology? And like I said, we do. We owe ourselves that apology, and we need to forgive ourselves for a lot of things. We need to forgive ourselves for what we didn't know, for what we were never taught, for what we inherited, for what we survived, for the roles we accepted without questioning, and for holding up standards that were never ours to hold. And I think it takes a minute to think about those things. Sometimes you have to stop and look at your journey and say, how much of this is actually mine? And how much of this is what I think I'm supposed to do? And that doesn't mean run away from your life and start over. No. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying as adults, we just need to look at these things to understand how they have shaped us, to then be able to say, hey, okay, so this is mine. I made these choices. I'm going to pay a consequence. But now how do we learn the lesson and move on to the next thing? And recognize, and I think this is the biggest piece, that we deserve joy. We deserve it. We deserve peace, and we deserve the chance to unlearn and relearn. And it's interesting because we sometimes forget that we're allowed to stand in our own truth. We are allowed to change and evolve. It's like a thing sometimes we don't allow people to do. But we also have to, before we can allow people to do, we have to allow ourselves to do that, right? The person you are today is not the person you were 10 years ago. You're allowed to evolve. You're allowed to make mistakes. You are, because that's what we are. We literally don't know how life happens every single day. we're allowed to be weak. We are. We're allowed to be weak. And it's okay to be vulnerable. Because being weak and vulnerable is very, very scary, because then that means trusting other people with our feelings and our lives. We deserve to be safe. Safety means different things for different people. Safety for me means something completely different than it does for a friend, for the woman down the street, for the man taking his kids to ice cream. Safety for me means that I feel comfortable to allow myself to open up and be vulnerable. Not necessarily that you can stand in front of me and beat the person up that's in front of me, right? Safety means I can be myself. That's what it is for me. But we also have the right to change our minds and to choose ourselves. And that's what's so important to me about this episode, is opening up to tell you that there's a person out here who has had internally a tough time, right? Some of it deserved, some of it undeserved. Nothing excruciatingly special about it, because life's for everybody. And my journey is my journey, and it's no better or no worse than somebody else's journey. But learning to live with what I learned to live with and learning to love me was a very important piece of growing up and life, right? So sometimes I have to remind myself, slow down, we can issue grace, right? Sometimes I have to say I didn't really like how that person spoke to me, and figure out why it bothers me. Sometimes I want to be heard in a conversation, but I'm not making sure the other person is heard, and then I'm mad that they don't hear me, but it doesn't occur to me that I need to listen to them too, the thing I'm working on. And allowing myself to just work on things, but also realizing that in choosing me first, everything else then falls into place. When we empty ourselves out for other people and we forget to take care of ourselves, then eventually the bucket runs dry and there's nothing to give other people. So like I said, in this great journey of unlearning and choosing myself, I had to do some things to choose me. That meant learning how to love myself, right? That was my biggest piece. Learning to take care of my health, because what did stress do to me? Stress almost took me out. Stress gave me the fun autoimmune disease, right? Which then exacerbated other things, right? And understanding where my boundaries were and learning, this was a very fun one, I gotta tell you, to say no and to not feel bad. I have to be honest. One of the hardest things to do when you're living your life based on the expectations of others, and when you're living your life to be amazing and perfect for the praise, and that's where you feel your value is, you actually hate to tell people no, because you're so worried they're going to be mad at you, and you're so worried about how they feel when you tell them no. You got to figure out how to couch it. You got to figure out all these things. That was me. I literally couldn't tell people no. And my inability to tell people no hurt me in so many ways. So many ways. That when they say no is a complete sentence, it is. And now, older, click, clack, knocking at 50, I totally get it. they're going to be okay. And what's funny is I used to think that when I told people no, that they wouldn't like me anymore, they wouldn't speak to me anymore, and that I would lose friends. So let's be honest, I have. And it's funny though, because then you look back and go, but were they actually friends in the first place? Or were they just trying to get something from you? You know, you start to learn the types of people that show up in your world. And there are givers and there are takers, right? You know that. And there are people that realize, and I don't even think it's intentional. So here's the other thing is I think a lot of things sometimes are very unintentional. They get used to something from you because it's what you give, right? And then once you pull back, all of a sudden they're mad because you've changed. But no is a word. But then there are people who then totally appreciate what you do, and you can tell, right? I also had to learn how to not operate out of guilt. I realized I had a lot of guilt in sometimes the blessings I received. And so as a result of that guilt, I would work really hard to make sure other people were taken care of who didn't have what I had. Because for some reason I felt like that's what I needed to do. I didn't want them to feel bad. I didn't want them to feel left out. I didn't want X, Y, and Z to happen. But for what? I don't even think they understood, knew, or even appreciated that that was going on. Because again, that was my mess. That's the thing, is I can't put on other people, oh, they don't do this and oh, they don't do. No. I gave them permission, right? So I had to learn how to pull back and stop giving permission. Why does all this matter? When you unlearn and you start to relearn and you build the values of life that you want for yourself, as imperfect as they are, then you're better equipped to handle what is coming next. Because here's the other thing. Life literally never stops, right? And so if you don't have a strong enough sense of self, a strong enough base, you can't handle what's coming next. You will crash and burn. And this is coming from a person who almost took herself out by not taking care of herself, by not getting educated. And we can't do that. Why? I got kids. I've got parents. I do have responsibilities. Yes, I still suffer from superwoman complex. And I still suffer from being a boss because stuff has to get done. But I now accept it about myself, right? And I do it because I know what's necessary and because I know it's my job. There are things I have to take care of. This is necessary. And it is, you know, we talked about older sisters and the issues that we have. This is it. This is one of them. But also in that unlearning, you become very comfortable in the decisions that you have to make. You become comfortable in the sacrifices that you have to make because you understand why you're doing them, and you become less angry about them. That doesn't make me less tired. It doesn't make me less sad, but it does help me balance better. And I think that's what I want you to do. If I could leave you with anything, and if you've listened to this whole thing right now, thanks. I want you to take a minute and I want you to decide, do I owe myself an apology? Do I owe myself a moment of grace? Do I owe myself the time to figure out what it is that makes me tick and what exactly it is that I like about myself that I can go back to? What is the thing, again, that brings me joy? Because I'm allowed to love me, my whole self, imperfections, flabby arms, whatever it is. I'm allowed to do that. And I need to be happy about that because I only have one of me. And they did not remake me, although, I mean, I do have a kid she's a little like me, but better. And we deserve to be free and to be happy. So, like I said, I believe we owe ourselves an apology, but we also owe ourselves forgiveness. We need to learn so we can unlearn what we were taught, because not everything we were taught was great. right? And we need to figure out where our lines are, our boundaries are, the reasons why we do the things that we do. Because life is coming at us hard, fast and quickly. Now, I've got lots of more things that I want to say, and I'm going to save some of that for a later date because I want to talk about the great unlearning when it comes to parenting your parents. That's going to be a different conversation. But let's circle back to what happens later on this week. Now, if you notice, I'm not sitting at my desk in my office. I'm sitting at my dining room table right here. We're going to call it my kitchen table, dining room table, whatever. But we're at the table. And no, this is not the red table. This is Dan's table. And we're hosting live a tour with Dr. Lakeisha Peters. Not Lakeisha Peters, my bad. With a different friend who is a doctor. We're going to be with Dr. Lakeisha McMillan. Now, Keisha, I'm sorry, that's just who I call her. It's my girl, Keisha. She's was an OBGYN, practicing OBGYN. And when I say we go back, I might not go back as far as some further friends, but we go back when she was in med school together. She was in med school and I moved to California more years ago than I want to count. So we all met when we were, on our shaky, brand new adult legs. And since then, she has an amazing journey she's been on, but she has found the space for her. And remember, I told you, when we owe ourselves an apology and we figure out who we are and what it is exactly that we like about ourselves, that's when you find your moment and your purpose. And she found her moment and her purpose. And she has become a perimenopause, menopause expert. I use her cup all the time. And you want to know why I have this cup? Because I'm one of her biggest fans, but also because I send her tons of women. She has a way of explaining to you what is happening to your body in a way that you understand that you are not going crazy. You're not. And she is on an apology tour entitled We Owe Women an Apology. Remember what I talked about earlier about the hormone replacement therapy? So she's going to come and she's going to talk to us. But the reason why we're sitting at the table is we're going to have other members join us. I got together some of my friends that represent different ages. And we're all going to come to the table and talk about perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause, the journeys in which we got there, and what we can do now. It's going to be a fun conversation. You're going to tune in on Thursday, December 18 at 7 p.m. And you can find it on my social media page. I think I'm going to put it on my Facebook page. It might also appear on my Instagram live page. We're going to try to put it there too. And maybe on Keisha's live. I'm still working out the details because, again, what are we? We're a baby podcast, and so we're learning as we go. But anyway, I hope you join. I want you to spread the word. Thank you for being here today and listening to me. And again, tell yourself sorry. And then tell yourself, I love you. And you're amazing. And you're amazing for what you have gone through, what you've survived, and who you are. Because quite simply, my darling, you're amazing.